Human history cannot be understood without examining the complex ties between economic life and imperial ambition. Empires rise, expand, transform and eventually decline, but behind these cycles we always find patterns of production, exchange, credit, resource management and financial strategy. Every imperial system has relied on economic foundations for strength, stability and legitimacy. Without adequate economic support no empire can last, and without a steady financial structure no empire can maintain administration or military power. The relationship between economics and empire forms a kind of continuous dialogue. Empires shape markets through laws and armies, but markets also reshape empires through opportunities and pressures that arise from trade, resource extraction and long-distance financial links. Finance flows along the channels created by conquest or diplomacy, but finance also creates incentives that push imperial rulers to expand into new regions or abandon old ones. To understand this relationship we can explore several themes that run across many eras. Empire and the need for economic foundations. Every empire begins with a concentration of political power that seeks to extend its influence beyond existing borders. But political control alone is never enough. Expansion requires food to support armies, materials to equip soldiers, revenue to fund administration and incentives to attract settlers or merchants. Thus the earliest forms of empire, whether in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia or East Asia, developed elaborate systems of taxation, tribute and agricultural management. The emperor or king claimed divine authority or military legitimacy, but the palace relied on scribes, accountants and tax collectors. Economic foundations also shaped the strategies of expansion. Some empires grew along river valleys where irrigation and farmland supported large populations. Others expanded along trade routes that connected distant markets. The quest for metal, salt, spices, livestock or fertile land often drove imperial campaigns. In each case economic motives mixed with political ambition, making the imperial project part quest for power and part search for wealth. The growth of long-distance trade. As empires expanded, trade networks grew more complex. Markets within the empire became more interconnected, and merchants moved goods over longer distances. With this growth came new financial practices such as credit, lending, contract enforcement and early forms of banking. In the Mediterranean world merchants developed systems of maritime loans that allowed them to share risk. In South Asia and East Asia merchants used letters of credit that enabled safer and more efficient long-distance trade. Imperial authorities encouraged these developments by building roads, ports and storage facilities, while also maintaining security along trade routes. The growth of long-distance trade often strengthened empire. Revenue from customs duties, tolls and market taxes increased. Precious materials flowed into the imperial treasury. Urban centers flourished and attracted skilled labor. Yet trade also created pressure on empires. Wealthy merchant factions began to influence politics. Regions with strong commercial power sometimes demanded autonomy or privileges. And rival empires competed to control profitable routes, leading to conflicts that shaped world history. Finance as a tool of imperial administration. Finance became essential as empires grew more complex. Large territories needed efficient systems of taxation and revenue collection. Ancient empires relied on tribute or agriculture-based taxes, but later empires created more sophisticated mechanisms. For instance, officials in the classical Mediterranean world used detailed registers to track land ownership and levy taxes. In Asia many empires developed standardized currency systems that encouraged trade while simplifying tax payments. Financial administration was more than simple revenue gathering. It was also a way to maintain control. To tax a population effectively an empire needed accurate records, trustworthy officials, and communication channels that connected distant provinces with the center. These requirements encouraged the growth of bureaucracy, literacy and administrative expertise. In this way finance strengthened the internal structure of imperial government. Credit and imperial ambition. Empires often depended on credit. Expansion required resources that exceeded annual tax revenue. Military campaigns were expensive, and emperors sometimes borrowed from wealthy citizens, temples, merchant guilds or associated states. Credit allowed rulers to invest in armies, infrastructure or diplomatic gifts. But borrowing also created vulnerability. If a campaign failed, the empire faced debt burdens that could weaken financial stability. Credit also linked empires with private financial groups. A powerful merchant class that held imperial debt gained influence over policy. This dynamic appeared in many places across history. At times, wealthy financiers supported imperial expansion in exchange for privileges. At other times, they pressured rulers to limit military spending to protect their investments. Thus, credit created a complex relationship between political rulers and economic elites. The role of currency in monetary policy. Currency served not only as a medium of exchange, but also as a tool of imperial identity and control. Emperors placed their images on coins to express authority. By standardizing currency across many regions, rulers strengthened unity and promoted trade. However, managing currency brought challenges. If the empire debased its coins to raise revenue, merchants and citizens lost trust. Inflation disrupted markets and weakened the ability of the state to fund its armies. Successful empires sought stable currency systems. Some controlled the supply of precious metals. Others developed paper money backed by administrative authority. In each case, monetary policy shaped both internal stability and international trade. When an empire maintained a trustworthy currency, merchants from distant regions were more willing to engage with its markets. When trust declined, trade suffered and imperial power weakened. Empire and resource extraction. Resource extraction is one of the most direct links between economics and empire. Conquered regions supplied raw materials such as timber, metals, grain, textiles, and livestock. These resources supported imperial populations and armies. They also fed manufacturing centers that produced goods for trade. Through extraction, an empire could grow wealthy, but the process often created tension with local populations. Heavy extraction exhausted land or labor, prompting unrest. Imperial administrators therefore tried to balance extraction with local stability. Some empires offered tax reductions or autonomy in exchange for steady resource supply. Others colonized frontier regions with loyal settlers who supported extraction industries. In many cases, the quest for resources pushed empires into new territories. This dynamic made economic need a driving force of imperial expansion. Urban centers and economic power. Cities served as hubs of trade, administration, and culture. In an imperial system, cities often held strategic and economic importance. Ports connected the empire to distant markets, while inland capitals served as political centers. Cities attracted merchants, artisans, scholars, and officials. Their markets stimulated production in rural areas, and their tax contributions supported the imperial treasury. Yet cities also needed protection and investment. Imperial authorities built walls, aqueducts, roads, and public buildings. These investments required financial planning and long-term revenue. Cities sometimes became semi-independent centers of power. Wealthy merchants or influential guilds challenged imperial authority or negotiated privileges. Thus, cities symbolized both imperial strength and potential political tension. The cost of military power. Military power is essential for imperial control. Armies defend borders, suppress revolts, guard trade routes, and project influence abroad. But militaries are extremely expensive. Salaries, weapons, supplies, transport animals, fortifications, and naval fleets require vast financial resources. Thus, the imperial economy must support the military if the empire is to survive. Throughout history, many empires fell because they could not sustain military costs. As borders expanded, the cost of defense increased. If tax revenue stagnated or trade declined, the empire faced financial strain. Some rulers raised taxes to fund the military, but this risked rebellion. Others relied heavily on credit, which created debt crises. The balance between military ambition and economic capacity was delicate, and failure to manage it often led to collapse. The influence of international trade systems. Empires rarely existed in isolation. They interacted with rival powers through diplomacy, war, and trade. International trade systems shaped economic environments in which empires operated. If an empire controlled a crucial route or resource, it gained strategic economic advantage. If another power blocked access to trade, the empire faced financial hardship. Competition for trade routes encouraged innovation. Empires developed larger ships, improved road networks, and created more reliable postal and courier systems. They formed alliances with merchant groups or foreign states to secure access to distant markets. Yet competition also sparked conflict. Control of strategic trade centers became a motive for war.